a civilian national security force.
My name is Lawrence Allen, and I lived and worked in the China region for over 20 years for the likes of Hershey and Nestle. I've written and published a number of books, both fiction and nonfiction, and in 2010 I published Chocolate Fortunes, the battle for the hearts, minds, and taste buds of China's consumers. When China opened its doors to the outside world in 1978, there were 1 billion people there who'd never tasted chocolate. Chocolate Fortunes is an East meets West cross-cultural adventure that chronicles the quarter-century battle between the world's chocolate companies for the hearts, minds, and taste buds of China's emerging consumers. And in 2014, I published Tree of Liberty Trilogy, a 30-year dystopian epic about the fictional reversal of fortunes between China and the United States that ends in 2020 with America's second revolution against tyranny. Tree of Liberty and Chocolate Fortunes are available wherever books are sold. The 1960s began with the Great Chinese Famine burning itself out, Mao being marginalized within the Chinese Communist Party power structure as a consequence, and so-called reformers unraveling some of the major damage caused by his grotesque failures. Though hardcore socialists themselves, these reformers offered the Chinese people more pragmatism and less dogma with their socialism, something that the re-traumatized Chinese people were no doubt grateful for. But sadly, we will see that Mao and his faction of fanatics weren't through with their cynical and abusive experimentation with the lives and fortunes of the Chinese people. The Mao Strikes Back sequel was in the planning. Sadly, the reformers' opportunity for change would be short-lived. For as deadly and destructive as Mao's era of the ridiculous, perverse, and insane was, he would now ferociously strike back with what can best be described as tyrannical madness. He would fight back against reformers by launching yet another nationwide campaign, the Great Proletariat Cultural Revolution, with the platform that counter-revolutionaries in Beijing and the bureaucracy have betrayed the revolution, and that it was every Chinese responsibility to fight to take the country back. Together with his wife Jiang Qing, they began the campaign by deliberately misguiding, miseducating, and fomenting a fanatical army of purist youth who he would then set loose to terrorize his political rivals and, consequently, the already suffering Chinese population. They were Chairman Mao's social justice warriors, his personal shock troops, anti-rightists, a kind of anti-Ra to do battle in the streets with phantom counter-revolutionaries who were supposedly lurking around every corner. Or, as they are called in America, a civilian national security force, Antifa, who also target phantom political enemies, but who fortunately never achieved meaningful numbers in the USA to become just as powerful, just as strong, and just as well-funded as the U.S. military.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well-funded.
But even the great Mao Zedong couldn't do this alone. Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, was his partner in this endeavor. She controlled the nation's media and, importantly, 70,000 loudspeakers that were in every school and factory. All printed materials were under their authority, from books to magazines to newspapers. Mao and his wife schemed to win back total power and control by creating a cult of personality around Mao himself. And they began by seizing the hearts and minds of China's youth. Mao ordered schools closed, and students were mobilized to carry out revolutionary action against the counter-revolutionaries like Deng Xiaoping and others, who threatened the purity of the communist revolution. And Mao's instruction manual? his little red book of sayings, which every student needed to memorize and recite like the Bible. Colleges and schools would be closed for 4 years as students ran amok, following Mao's every order, no matter how mad or destructive. It may have been coincidence, but it was certainly interesting that the propaganda campaign launched to bring down Mao's rivals happened to be led by the wife of one of the country's leaders. But the message was the same. Their rivals were betraying the nation, colluding with evil foreign forces, and where dehumanization through baseless accusations and labeling bordered on the ridiculous. And in both cases, the media and education apparatus were employed to brainwash the nation's youth. At one time in the not-too-distant past, there were 1 billion people in China who'd never tasted chocolate. When China opened its doors, 5 of the world's chocolate icons slugged it out in a battle royale to see which would become the Emperor of Chocolate. Chocolate Fortunes is an inside look at the battle for the hearts, minds, and taste buds of China's consumers. Here's what they're saying about Chocolate Fortunes. The Global Times said it is a scintillating glimpse inside one of the most hard-fought cross-cultural indulgence battles since the Opium Wars. Publishers Weekly said it's informative, cautionary, and essential. This book is a must-read for executives currently doing business or planning to in this most critical market. And the Houston Business Journal said, Allen wrote his book so the lessons learned can be applied to other industries looking to break into an emerging economy. Learn more about Chocolate Fortunes by visiting chocolatefortunes.net and get your copy. Chocolate Fortunes is available wherever books are sold. What happened during the Cultural Revolution amounted to domestic terrorism, and unlike a dozen or so Antifa blocking an intersection in Seattle or Portland, there were over 10 million of them. Hopped-up teens ran wild across the country. They could ride any transportation for free. The Army was obligated to feed them whenever they asked, and they would arrest and beat anyone who so much had a finger pointed at them. Being accused was as good as guilty, and these roving mobs were judge, jury, and executioner. When the Red Guards arrived on your street, you prayed for them to pass your house by. This fictionalized depiction in the film The Last Emperor does a good job of portraying the tyrannical madness.
Comrade, this must be a mistake. I know this man. He is a good man.
Who are you?
I am a gardener.
Join us, comrade, or bust off.
造反有理，一反道理。20万岁，反有理。
But what has he done?
He's been accused.
Accused of what?
Emperor's lucky. Villainous element. Rotten righteous. Confess your crime.
Nothing to confess.
Cut out, Chimamau. Confess your crimes.
Nothing to confess.
Cut out.
造反有理，造反有理，一反到底。
Confess your crime.
Wait! He is a teacher. He is a good teacher.
You cannot do this to him. Move. You want to beat him? He is a good teacher.
革命无罪，造反有理。革命无罪，造反有理。革命无罪，造反有理。
He
China's radical left is moving on many fronts, perpetrating violence in our streets, subverting and destroying our history, infiltrating our academic institutions, and poisoning our culture. Now, this isn't hyperbole. The country we all love is in jeopardy, and the Ingram angle is exposing it all. Now, we begin tonight with perhaps the most wide-ranging interview that Antifa documentarian Andy Ngo has ever done. Now, remember, he was violently attacked a few weeks ago by that masked mob in Portland.
And, like America's so-called culture leaders, there were plenty of adults around, grown-ups in power who encouraged the violence and called for uprisings in the streets and mob rule for their own cynical benefit, to attack their political rivals. And like city officials in Portland, Oregon, ordering police to stand down when Antifa terrorized conservative groups and speakers on the city streets, China's police were ordered not to interfere with the Red Guards and just stand by and let them have their way. They were on orders from Chairman Mao, after all. They were the absolute power-hungry socialist deep state who didn't care about the consequences of what they were doing, like whose lives were destroyed in the process. They were absolutely corrupted by absolute power. But could government complicity in allowing Red Guards to terrorize their political enemies into submission, and the Chinese population at large, ever happen in the United States? Could American youth ever be conned into becoming a violent and threatening tool of the elite political left when their dear leader lost an election? As part of a power struggle at the very top echelons of our federal government? Could our government officials ever become so corrupted and so power-mad that they would enable such horrible things to happen in the United States of America?